Practically nobody in Texas is paying attention to this, and that's exactly why it matters. Good evening and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Texas Talkin, the show where opinions are strong, the filter is weak, and somebody's feelings are probably going to get hurt before we're finished. I'm your host, Shiloh Platts, part political commentator, part professional instigator, and living proof that you can, in fact, make people mad with nothing but a microphone, a cowboy hat, and some basic common sense. While you've been working, raising your family, and trying to make sense of a world that just seems a little more upside down every year, there's a group of judges quietly making decisions that shape everything from criminal justice to constitutional rights, to whether the law actually means what it says. And here's the part that should bother you. Most Republicans don't even vote in these races like they matter, but they do. They matter a lot. Folks, judges aren't neutral machines on constitutional autopilot. They have philosophies. They have instincts. They decide whether their job is to interpret the law or to creatively rewrite it when it gets in the way of what they think should happen. And for too long, we've watched activist judges treat the law like it's flexible, optional, open to interpretation, depending on the mood of the day. And just like that, the rule of law starts to erode, slowly, quietly, until regular Texans are left wondering why outcomes feel inconsistent, unpredictable, even unfair. That's not justice, that's improvisation, in a courtroom, nonetheless. And when the law becomes subjective, power doesn't disappear, it just shifts. It shifts away from voters and toward whoever happens to be wearing the robe, which is why Republican involvement in judicial races isn't optional, it's essential. We can't claim to be the party of law and order while ignoring the people whose entire job is to interpret the law. That's not strategy, folks. That's surrender. So more and more Texans are starting to ask a very simple question. What if we put judges on the bench who actually believe the law means what it says? Which brings me to Thomas Smith, tonight's guest. Smith is a candidate for the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals who believes that judges should follow the law, not freelance it. We're going to talk to him tonight about restoring consistency, restoring trust, and restoring something that used to be non-negotiable in this country, the idea that justice isn't political. Because if the rule of law becomes optional, it doesn't stay around very long. And when it's gone, well, you don't have a justice system anymore. You have something else. Tom Smith joins us next. Let's get dialed in. And joining me now is a candidate, Republican candidate, for the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, Tom Smith. Tom, thanks for coming on.
Hello, it's good to be with you.
It's great to be with you. And I want to start by saying that in recent weeks, we actually had an interview with a man who is now undoubtedly going to be on the Court of Criminal Appeals, John Messinger. And during that conversation, he sort of broke down for our viewers an overview of the court's purview, what it does, and why it matters. Now, for my viewers who didn't have an opportunity perhaps to watch that interview, I would invite you to go to our Texas Talkin YouTube channel and pull it up because it was very powerful. But in saying that, I want to give you an opportunity, for those who may have missed it, to kind of give us an overview of why this court matters and what it does.
Sure, you bet. So I would say two things. This is our state Supreme Court for criminal matters. And also, importantly, constitutional law matters that come up within a criminal context. So Texas and Oklahoma are the only two states in the country that have a bifurcated system at the highest level of our state appellate.
Now, that's $100 word, counselor, bifurcated.
That's right. So what it really means in plain English is that there are two state Supreme Courts in Texas and Oklahoma, one for civil cases and one for criminal cases. The other 48 states have one state Supreme Court that handle both. But We in Texas like to be different, so we are. And this court was created by our Texas Constitution in the 1870s, actually created because at that time there were too many criminal court matters at the one state Supreme Court. And so they never had a chance to get to cases that dealt with money, or the cases dealing with actually a financial stake were backlogged. So this court was created in an effort to alleviate that. And it's kind of ironic that 150 years later, this court itself has a backlog problem of too many criminal court cases that have not been dealt with. So it's kind of an interesting little fact, and we can get into that a little bit. But also very quickly, there are constitutional law matters that come up before this court. So, and I know
Give
we'll
us
talk
some
about
examples.
I will talk about the Stevens election fraud decision, where this court took away the power of the AG to prosecute election fraud. That case originated
Right here.
as in right in Jefferson County as a constitutional law matter under the Texas Constitution, separation of powers issue. So some people, including my opponent, are fond of calling this court a specialty court that focuses narrowly into criminal law matters, and that couldn't be further from the truth. As a matter of fact, this court deals with constitutional law cases on a regular basis, and actually the most important, impactful cases that this court deals with are constitutional law cases, whether it's an election fraud decision that we can talk about, or death penalty cases, which are inevitably constitutional law cases. So hopefully that gives everybody a background as to what this court does.
Well, you are indeed running for a seat on this court in a runoff election that will take place this May. Why do you believe this court needs a fresh perspective?
This is a court that's gotten out of its lane in recent years. It's We have 9 Republicans on this court. You would think that our state's highest criminal court would have 9 solid constitutional conservatives on it that are reflective of the state of Texas and reflective of the fact that we have a conservative state. And we don't even have a solid majority of 5 conservatives on this court. They're all Republicans, but we do not have a conservative majority. The Stevens election fraud case is probably the most well-known example of that, where they ruled that our office, because I work for the Attorney General, we could not prosecute election fraud, that only local district attorneys could do that pursuant to the Texas Constitution. And let me highlight something about that decision that I
Please.
promise that probably no one that watches this will know. So the court ruled that only local district attorneys could prosecute election fraud pursuant to the Texas Constitution because they only had that authority granted to them under the Constitution and not the Attorney General's office. It overturned a 71-year-old statute that, by the way, the legislature just restored that authority last year. So that new law could come back before this court again to be reviewed. But when the court disposed of that case, they did not send the case back to Jefferson County with a directive that the trial judge in that case order a local prosecutor to investigate the allegations of election fraud that come up. They just dismissed the case.
Wow.
Then they had a second opportunity to do that on rehearing, and they affirmed the dismissal of the case. So I like to highlight that because that's an example of wherever you fall along the lines of the constitutional debate on that case, this is a court that believes so little in its ultimate decision that it just dismissed the case outright instead of sending the case back to the local prosecutor in line with the reasoning of their own decision. So, I bring that up because you can fall on either side, but I think it's a glaring example of how this court has just made a mess of things in so many cases. And the effect of that decision was made apparent the following year in 2022 in Harris County alone. There were problems with multiple elections that came up. And no local authority was going to investigate that, and we couldn't.
I want
So
to
that
peel
gives you
that
an
back.
example of the effect of this.
Yeah, I want to
Yeah, you
peel that
bet.
back a little bit further. I'm not a lawyer. So when the court dismissed the Stevens case, it would stand to reason, and
Yep,
please correct me if I'm wrong, that it would leave the discretion as to whether or not this should be prosecuted up to the local district attorney. Am I understanding that correctly?
that's correct.
So, in other words, the district attorney could choose to prosecute, or, which I believe is what happened, choose to not prosecute. And then it kind of goes back to, and I'm not going to throw out any conspiracy theories, but at a local level, district attorneys, other local elected officials tend to have a much, at least closer proximity, and in some cases, perhaps even a close relationship with people who may be the subject of a case. This case being, of course, tied to our incumbent sheriff. Am I going down the wrong path here?
Well, you're no, you're correct about that. But the bizarre thing about how this court handled the case was when they dismissed it, the case was just over. So, they didn't even send it back to Jefferson County to say, "Hey, look into this further." They just dismissed it and said this case is over.
But the
So,
district attorney could have stepped in and chosen to prosecute. Is that correct?
I suppose they could have went and gotten another grand jury indictment to have investigated it again, but that did not happen.
Likelihood is probably slim to none of that happening in most instances, I would assume.
Yes, I think that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Now, I want to go down to the next topic that I think what you just talked about dovetails well into this. What impact, you mentioned the court having 9 Republican judges. What impact, sir, does Republican involvement potentially have in these races, and why is it so important?
That's a great question. All of our judges in the state of Texas are elected, county level, regional courts of appeals, statewide. They're all elected, and they're all elected in partisan elections. They're in the Democrat primary, they're Democrat primary candidates, they're Republican primary candidates. And so, you know, that's set up that way for a reason. And the reason is that there are very distinct differences in our parties, regardless of whether you're running for a judicial office, a legislative office, or an executive office. And that doesn't change just because you're a judicial candidate or you're running for a judicial office. Party involvement matters. Being a Republican matters. A lot of judicial candidates will de-emphasize that. They'll try not to talk about it. They'll try to talk about their legal resume and say, I've done this, this, and this. I'm board certified in that. I have all these years of experience in that. And I don't want to discount any of that. But I'm here to tell you that anybody in the Republican primary running for any judicial office virtually at any level is going to have a really good legal resume.
I
Otherwise,
would
they
hope
would
so.
they would not be running,
I
right?
would hope so.
They would not be running. And so you have to look a little bit further and ask a couple more questions if you're a voter, which is, number one, what have you done? What's your track record? What tangible things can you point to that would give a conservative and a Republican some comfort that they should vote for you? And number two is the point that you mentioned. What is your Republican Party involvement? What have you done for the Republican Party? It's one thing to just say you voted in primaries, okay? And I know we've had some issues with maybe people not even doing that,
Yeah, we have.
but but you should talk about that. And I've been a lifelong Republican. Um, my grandfather was a delegate for Barry Goldwater a long time ago, and
Wasn't even a twinkle in my parents' eye during the
that,
Goldwater days, I'm afraid.
that's well, that's right. And so I wasn't either, but I came along and so I'm trying. I think I lost you here. I'm trying to get back to. There we go. Let's see if I can get back to where I was. Can you see me again now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. So yeah, so I've been a Republican my whole life. My grandmother trucked me around to Republican Party meetings and that kind of thing, and I got involved at a very young age before I moved to Texas, and then since I moved to Texas, in the last 10 years, I've worked for the Attorney General's office, one of the biggest conservative fighters in the country, and so I think that should account for something when people are considering who to vote for in a primary election. And Whether you're voting in my race or any race, I think you should ask judicial candidates, what's your Republican Party involvement? What have you done? I've been a precinct chair. I've been a state convention delegate. I've been a national convention delegate. And I think that involvement matters, especially matters in judicial races where you kind of tend to vote for judicial candidates and then you just assume that they're going to be good conservatives. And when they get on the bench, and sometimes, as we've seen, that's not always the case.
Well, and sometimes when these candidates end up getting on the bench, they become activist judges. And so the last question I want to ask you is how have, in many cases in the state of Texas, right here, activist judges eroded the rule of law in this country?
They've done it a couple of times. In this court, I want to bring up another example, which is this court in 2013 threw out our state's law banning online solicitation of minor kids as a violation of the First Amendment. And the language that they had a problem with was the legislature written a law that says if a person is proven to have intent to gratify a sexual desire and engage in online communications with a minor child, they can be convicted under the statute. The court deemed that a violation of the First Amendment and said that it can include in things like artistic expression and stuff like that. Just
I remember you posting about
all,
this, and I didn't know about it until you had.
Yeah,
so thank you for that.
Yeah, you bet. And so this is our all Republican Court of Criminal Appeals, everybody. And so we went a year and a half in the state of Texas without having an online solicitation law that anyone could prosecute.
That is wild.
The legislature restored that authority. I happened to actually work on the legislative fix to that with Senator Huffman, and Representative Tony Dale was no longer in the legislature. And that law has held up over time. However, the reason I'm talking about a law that was thrown out 12 years ago, 13 years ago now, is because this court is still granting relief to sex offenders that were convicted under the old law, despite the fact there has been intervening Supreme Court precedent that would allow this court to stop doing that. The Supreme Court in 2023, for example, said that states have the right to regulate speech on the margins. Actually involved a Texas case on age verification. That case alone would give this court the ability to stop doing that. And yet they won't. They granted relief to a sex offender last October, a guy who was convicted in 2012 under the old statute. And so, this is just another example where this court has gotten so far out of its lane, and that kind of thing needs to stop. You need to have solid, dependable, conservative jurists that conservatives and really everybody in Texas can count on.
I couldn't agree with you more. So your runoff election comes up in May. It seems like an eternity from now in political time. But what would you encourage folks who are watching this to do? How can we help you? How can my viewers be more involved and engaged? Because frankly, we have to show up in these runoff elections. Otherwise, our voices aren't heard, and the change that you're talking about, the kind of impact that you'd like to bring, will not be realized.
Right. So several things that people can do. You do have to get involved. You do have to make sure you vote. Please check out my website, smithfortexas.org, smithfortexas.org. I can be contacted through the website. Very responsive to people that contact me and have additional questions or they need more information. The other thing that I would encourage people to do is ask that question about, and my website has a lot of information on this, about what your track record is. I was one of only 2 lawyers in our agency that helped write our state's sanctuary cities law. And it's been upheld as constitutional to this day. As I mentioned, I worked on the online solicitation law. I've been an election integrity lawyer for Donald Trump, and actually prior to that for the RNC. And actually, importantly, on that point, I would like to mention that this race, my race, may have more to do with the future of election integrity in the state of Texas than anyone would ever know.
Tell me more.
Because with the new law that was passed by the legislature last year, that law could be challenged again. I work for an office that has consistently fought for election integrity in many, many ways. Our office sued, to try to stop the state of Pennsylvania from, diluting the vote of Texans in 2020. And I think time has proven us to have been wise on that point. My opponent works for this court who has gutted election integrity. And she actually works for the judge who wrote the decision in that case that took away our authority to prosecute election fraud. She's a very, very talented lawyer. She's a good person, but that's something about her record. And she works for this court that has not been kind to election integrity in the state of Texas. So, I would encourage people to think about that, because it really is not a stretch to say that the future of election integrity in the state of Texas could depend a lot on this race.
And that, I believe, is the point that we will close on. That's what's at stake here, ladies and gentlemen. Tom, I want to thank you for taking some time to come on the program tonight. May God bless you, and may God continue to bless the great state of Texas. Thank you for helping us keep Texas talking.
Amen, Shiloh. All right. We'll talk to you soon. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Stay dialed in to interviews and content just like this by clicking that follow button on my Facebook page, or hit the subscribe button to learn more about exclusive access that you won't want to miss.